Hey, how's it going, guys? Welcome back to another PS4 video. So I've made some videos in the past breaking down things like the PS4 payloads and what each payload can be used for on the PS4, along with some handy homebrew applications to have installed on the PS4. However, one thing that I've still not discussed properly yet is the GoldHEN plugins, which are an incredibly powerful tool to add many additional features to your PS4 jailbreak using GoldHEN. So in this video, I'm going to go over the main GoldHEN plugins, along with some recent plugins released by third parties to show you how they work and what they can all be used for. So the GoldHEN plugins can be enabled from the plugins menu inside the GoldHEN settings page. The latest beta release of GoldHEN now includes an option to download the latest plugins directly from the repo, and you have the option to enable the most common plugins directly from this menu. Any additional plugins must be installed manually by copying the plugin into the data GoldHEN plugins folder, and they can be controlled by a config file called plugins.ini, which can be placed in the data GoldHEN folder. Now this file determines what plugins get loaded depending on which game is launched. So as we can see here from the default setup of the plugin file, we have a couple of different ways that we can set this up. So we have in square brackets, we have the title ID of the application, and then the path of where that plugin is located. And that means whenever that title is launched, that plugin will be loaded. So if you have any plugins that are specific to a certain game or application, then you only want that plugin to load when that game is loaded and not when another game is loaded. So in that case, you would just specify the title ID of the game for that plugin and then put in the file path of the plugin underneath, and it will only load that plugin when that game or application is launched. Otherwise, you can also put in default in square brackets, and then any plugin file paths you put underneath that section, you launch any application and that plugin will be loaded. So any universal plugins that are meant to be applied for any title that is launched, any game or application, you would put in the default section. And you turn that file into a plugins.ini file and save it to that folder in GoldHEN, and that will determine what plugins get loaded whenever you launch an application. So the two most common plugins are the ones that can be enabled directly from the plugins menu. We have the Game Patch plugin first of all. You can just enable it directly in the plugins menu. And then with that option enabled, you can apply specific patches to your games. Now you apply the patches using homebrew applications like the PS4 Cheats Manager, which is the main homebrew application for applying these patches, but it can also be applied using the Items Flow Game Manager in the trainer section under your game. You can also apply the patches from in there as well. So you can apply different patches like 60 FPS patches, disable motion blur, disable other effects within the game like film grain, things like that that you normally can't change on a console version of a game, and also lower the resolution to push higher frame rates. And there's also patches for enabling developer and debug menus for the game as well. So that is what that plugin does, and it does not have to be configured with the plugins INI file because you can just enable it and disable it directly from the menu. The same thing with the other plugin in here, the AIO Fix plugin, and that one just fixes specific issues with older firmwares that would cause black screen and other issues. So this basically resolves that. It applies an all-in-one fix, which will kind of fix any kind of issues on these older firmwares. If you're still on 5.05 firmwares and other older firmwares, it can fix a lot of those issues when you're running newer applications. It also kind of fixes that issue we had with the 9.60 PS3 WebKit exploit with the latest jailbreak, where we're having the black screen and save data corruption issues. It can also resolve those problems too, to a degree, although it's still not really recommended to use this plugin directly for that purpose because there's a separate AIO patch that's built in to the Blu-ray exploit, and that one is properly implemented for that purpose. So that is the one that should be used over this plugin. But for older firmwares that are having various issues, you can enable this plugin to correct those issues and get newer games and applications working properly with less issues. So those are the two main plugins that are available right there. But if we go to the GoldHEN plugin repository, there's a bunch of additional plugins that you can also install and apply. So the top one here is the AFR plugin, the Application File Redirector. So this is one of my personal favorites because it allows you to replace the game files without having to create a modified package, a modified version of the game, or a modified update file that you have to install on top of the game in order to apply the modified files. So if you're doing texture replacements or character models, character skin replacements, any of that kind of stuff, then you can swap it out. Some developer menus and things can also be loaded by changing the menus in the game files. That can also be swapped out using this method. So you go into the GoldHEN folder and you create an AFR folder, and inside that folder you create the title ID folder of the game that you want to replace the files for. And then in there, you then put in any files with the same location as their original location in the game directory in this folder. And then any custom files that you put in there will be swapped out at launch. So when this plugin is launched, whenever you load the game, it will first check the data folder in that location to see if the file that it's looking for exists there first. And if it does, it will load that file instead of the original file for the game. And that allows you to swap out the files without having to reconfigure a package file, which definitely makes things a lot easier. And I also use this for Resident Evil 4 Remake to replace a bunch of the skins for like the enemy skins to different characters, as you can see here, where I've got the character model as Joel from The Last of Us instead of Leon from Resident Evil. And then the same with, different enemy characters changed to different character types. That's all done using the AFR plugin without having to create a modified update file, package file that you'd have to reinstall onto the game, which would take a lot longer. So that is one of the features there. Also for doing things like Skyrim, installing PC mods on the PS4 version for Skyrim and Fallout, you can also use this plugin for that purpose as well. So that's one of the other big plugins that are available. Then there's a few smaller plugins here. You've got the button swap plugin. It will just swap the X and circle buttons around on Asia region consoles, because consoles in Asia typically have a circle as the select option and X as the back button, whereas we in the Western countries have it the other way around, where X is to select and circle is to go back. So this will just swap it round. And then also you've got Force 1080p display. I should mention the developers of each of these as I'm going through. So the AFR plugin is from Sistro and JoeCover, the button swap plugin is from JoeCover, and the Force 1080p display is from Illusion. So it reports to the app that it's connected to a 1080p display. So you have the ability to force 1080p. I haven't really had a need to use this, but if you do use this plugin, let me know exactly what you're using it for. Also, we have force 30 FPS, so you can force any game to run at 30 FPS. Now, one of the reasons for using this is that if the game has a very unstable frame rate and it's constantly fluctuating because it's trying to target 60, but it's not reaching 60 most of the time and it's fluctuating all over the place, then you could just set it to 30 FPS so that at least you have a more consistent experience. There's also games that have dynamic resolution scaling where it's trying to say hit 60 FPS, but it's constantly crushing the resolution in order to achieve that 60 FPS, so the game is just a blurry mess. So if you actually want better image quality, then you could force the game to run at 30 FPS. At least you get a consistent frame rate, even though it's not a high frame rate. And then the dynamic resolution scaling doesn't have to work as hard to crush the image quality, and you can get a better image quality, a better experience. So that one is from Illusion as well. Then we have the Fliprate Remover, also from Illusion, which removes the frame rate limit for games using the system function SCE video out set flip rate. So if the game happens to use that function to limit the frame rate, then this will simply remove that limit so the game can, hit whatever its actual target frame rate is, or unlock it to just allow the game to hit as high a frame rate target as is capable of reaching. So that is another option there. Then we have the FrameTime Logger, also from Illusion here. Only really useful, I suppose, if you're actually analyzing the performance of your games. Then you can log the frame times by pressing L3 and L1 and triangle to start capturing the frame time data. And then you can press L3, R3, L1 and R1 plus square to stop the plugin. And then the logs are outputted to the data frame logger folder. And in there you will find the frame time stats, which you could then, put into some kind of software to visualize it in a graph. So that is something that you can do there if you're into that sort of thing. And then also we have the GamePad Helper plugin. I made a separate video on this from JoeCover. So this allows you to do custom keybinds. Just like if you were on a PC game, you can bind your keyboard's buttons, any button, to a different function. Well, you can now do that with your controller using this plugin on the PS4. So you're not limited to whatever button layouts the game gives to you. You can actually just create your own custom button binds. And the config file for this, it has its own configuration file called gamepad.ini. And you set this up in the same way as the plugins.ini file itself, where you have a default section. Anything in the default section will apply for any title that is launched. But then you can also set specific custom button binds for each title. So depending on what game you're launching, you can have your own custom button binds for the controller. You can also adjust the dead zones of the sticks. So if you have stick drift, where the character starts moving when the sticks are in the idle position, not moving, then you can kind of widen the dead zone to cancel that out. Or if you have a custom controller with those Hall effect joysticks that are more accurate, then you can lower the dead zone to make it more sensitive. So you have those abilities using this plugin. Definitely pretty handy there. You can also customize the button mapping of the touchpad as well and have it do a separate function when you press, you know, the top right, top left, bottom right and bottom left of the controller touchpad. So that is also an option there as well. So a pretty handy plugin. And then we have the Game Patch plugin, which we know all about already. Then we also have the No Share Blocks plugin. So this one's from Illusion and Nick. So removes image, watermark, video and screenshot blocks from games. I have seen one example of this with a load screen of, I think it was one of the Final Fantasy games, where you can see a bunch of watermark and debug text in the bottom right hand corner. But with this applied, it will cancel that out and remove it. So it can get rid of some watermark text on your games if you find that to be a problem. But I guess the other big thing is the ability to take screenshots without the screenshot blocks. There are some games that block screenshots and recording during certain cutscenes. I think it's to avoid spoilers, which seems a bit strange, but there are some games that do actually prevent you from taking screenshots during those scenes. And this plugin will bypass that so that you can still take screenshots and record video during those moments. So that can be a handy feature to have enabled as well. Now, the other plugins that are third-party plugins that I think are also worth mentioning here, one of them, of course, is the YouTube Adblock plugin, which I covered in my previous video. I'll leave a link to that down in the video description, a very handy plugin. So this plugin from Earth Onion allows you to block YouTube ads and also integrated sponsors, intros and outros. That is all built in. You apply the plugin, and then when you launch the YouTube application, you'll see the sponsor block message showing that it is enabled, showing that it's working. And then whenever you launch a YouTube video, the ads should be automatically skipped. And also these sponsored integrations, intros and outros will also be automatically skipped. So that is the deal with this. It's not 100% perfect. Like most ad blockers for YouTube are not perfect. You'll still get an ad every now and again, but it's greatly reduced compared to just using the YouTube application normally. It's also been turned into a homebrew installer, so you can just run that installer application and it will set up and install the plugin for you so that you don't have to actually manually edit the plugins file. It will just do that for you. So that's also a very handy thing that's been added. Also, we have, of course, the GTA 5 private server. So you can play GTA online. If you have the latest GTA 5 update installed on your PS4 as a fake package, you'll be able to apply this plugin and then switch to the online mode, and it will allow you to connect to the server. Now, you do have to do a lot of setup for this and get an authentication token set up, get the plugin installed. There's a few different steps to this. I've done a full video tutorial showing how to get connected and set up with this private server. But if you want to be able to play GTA 5 online with other players on a jailbroken PS4 where you're not able to access the official servers, then this is another option. You just apply the plugin, copy your authentication token into the required location, and it will read that when it launches the game. And if you're authenticated on the server, it will allow you to connect and play online with other players using the private server with GTA 5. And that GTA 5 private server is the LSO server, the Los Santos Online private server from Jorby, who I believe is also the developer of the plugin. So yeah, you can really extend the functionality and get a lot more out of your jailbroken PS4 if you utilize these plugins properly. If you're interested in me breaking down some of the other things you can do with your jailbroken PS4, I have done a full video that goes over all of the PS4 payloads and what they all do. It is an older video, but the payloads haven't really changed since then. So that video is still relevant. I'll leave it linked in the cards and in the video description, so you can find out what each of the different payloads do that you can load from Payload Guest or from an exploit host. So you can find out there. And also my handy homebrew applications video that breaks down some of the best homebrew applications to have installed on your jailbroken PS4 and what they all do and why you should have them installed. So I'll go ahead and leave those down in the video description as well. So hope you guys enjoyed this one or found the information useful. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. And once again, as always, I'll hopefully see you guys in the next one.